The woman no one wanted. A single mother, scarred by shame and silence, has run from 3 towns until one quiet cowboy refuses to let her disappear. If you've ever felt invisible, judged for something you couldn't undo, or wondered if anyone would ever choose to stand beside you when the whole world turned away, then this story is for you. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Lena's story travels. The summer festival had turned Miller's Crossing into a carnival of dust and noise. Banners snapped in the dry wind, children screamed through the square with ribbons trailing from their fists, and the smell of roasted meat and sweet bread hung thick over the crowd. It was the kind of day that brought everyone out: ranchers, shop owners, drifters passing through, women in their Sunday calico, men with their hats pulled low against the glare. The whole town, it seemed, had gathered to celebrate another year survived on the edge of Wyoming territory. Lena Hart stood at the very edge of it all, one hand gripping her son's small shoulder, the other clutching a worn cloth bag that held everything she owned. She had learned long ago how to make herself small, how to tuck her chin, soften her voice, avoid eye contact. How to move through a crowd like smoke, present but untouchable, seen but never acknowledged. It was a skill born of necessity, honed across 3 towns and 4 years of running. And today, like every day before it, she practiced it with the precision of someone who knew that survival depended on invisibility. Caleb tugged at her skirt. "Mama, can I see the horses?" His voice was bright, untouched by the weight she carried. He was 4 years old with wild brown curls and a gap-toothed smile that still believed the world was kind. Lena's heart clenched every time she looked at him, part love, part terror. He didn't understand yet what it meant to be her son, didn't know that his existence was both her greatest joy and the reason doors closed before she could knock. "Not yet, sweet boy," she whispered, steering him away from the main square toward the quieter edge of the festival grounds. "Let's walk a little first." The truth was, she didn't belong here. Not at this festival, not in this town. She had arrived in Miller's Crossing 6 weeks ago with nothing but a false name and a desperate hope that this place might be different. She had found work washing linens at the boarding house, kept her head down, and tried to build something that resembled a life. But she knew better than to believe it would last. It never did. The whispers had already started. She heard them in the pauses between conversations, saw them in the way women's eyes slid past her in the mercantile. No husband, a child, no family, no story that made sense. In a town this small, silence was as damning as confession. Lena guided Caleb past a booth selling hand-carved toys, past a group of young men betting on arm wrestling matches, past the laughter and music that seemed to belong to everyone but her. She was searching for the safest route back to the boarding house when she felt it, the shift in the air, the sudden hush that moved through the crowd like a cold wind. She looked up and saw Margaret Fairweather standing in the center of the square, surrounded by a circle of women in fine dresses. Margaret was the wife of the town's wealthiest rancher, a woman whose approval could make or break a reputation. She was tall, silver-haired, and carried herself with the kind of authority that came from never having been told no. And she was looking directly at Lena. Lena's stomach dropped. She tightened her grip on Caleb's hand and tried to turn away, but it was too late. Margaret's voice cut through the noise of the festival, sharp and clear. "You there, girl with the child?" The crowd shifted, opening a path between them. Faces turned, conversation stopped. Lena felt the weight of 100 eyes settle on her like stones. She considered running, her legs tensed, her breath quickened. But Caleb was looking up at her with confusion, and she wouldn't teach him that fear was the only answer. So she stood still and met Margaret Fairweather's gaze. "Yes, ma'am?" Margaret stepped forward, her silk skirts whispering against the dirt. The women around her followed like a flock of well-dressed crows. When she stopped, she was close enough that Lena could see the disgust in her eyes. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced," Margaret said, her tone dripping with false politeness. "You've been working at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, haven't you?" "Yes, ma'am." "And this is your boy?" Lena's hand trembled on Caleb's shoulder. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret's smile was thin and cold. "How lovely. And where, if I may ask, is your husband?" The question landed like a slap. Around them, the crowd leaned in, hungry for the answer they already knew. Lena felt her face flush hot, felt the familiar sting of shame crawl up her throat. She had faced this moment in 3 other towns, had tried honesty once, lies twice. Neither had saved her. "I don't have one, ma'am." The murmurs started immediately, low, vicious, spreading like fire through dry grass. Margaret's expression didn't change, but her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "I see. How unfortunate." She glanced at the women beside her, then back at Lena. "You understand, of course, that Miller's Crossing is a respectable town. We have standards, expectations. Surely you can appreciate that a woman in your condition presents certain concerns for those of us who value decency and moral character." Lena's vision blurred at the edges. She had heard variations of this speech before, knew what came next. The suggestion that she leave, the warning that her presence was a stain on the community, the thinly veiled threat that if she didn't go willingly, she would be driven out. She looked down at Caleb, who was pressed against her leg, his small face tight with fear he didn't yet have words for. She thought about the tiny room at the boarding house, the few coins she had saved, the impossible question of where they would go next. And then she heard a voice, low, steady, cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. "Mrs. Fairweather." The crowd shifted again. Lena looked up and saw a man stepping forward from the edge of the square. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and the kind of quiet presence that commanded attention without demanding it. He wore a simple work shirt, dusty boots, and a hat pulled low enough to shadow his eyes. But when he removed the hat and held it against his chest, Lena saw a face that was weathered and honest, with lines carved by wind and work rather than cruelty. He looked at Margaret Fairweather without flinching. "That's enough." Margaret's eyebrows lifted. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Lawson." "I said that's enough." His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "This woman hasn't done anything to warrant this treatment, and neither has her boy." Margaret's mouth tightened. "Mr. Lawson, I'm sure you mean well, but you don't understand the situation. This woman has no husband, no family, no— I understand that she's standing here being humiliated in front of half the town for no reason other than your sense of superiority." He turned to Lena, and for the first time in 4 years, someone looked at her without judgment. "Ma'am, my name is Reed Lawson. I apologize for the rudeness you've been shown here today." Lena stared at him, unable to speak. His eyes were gray, steady, kind. He wasn't offering her pity. He was offering her respect. Something so foreign she almost didn't recognize it. Margaret stepped between them, her face flushed with anger. "Mr. Lawson, you are making a terrible mistake. This woman is—" "A person," Reed said quietly. "Same as you, same as me." He looked at Lena again. "If you're ready to leave, I'd be happy to walk you out of here." It wasn't a rescue. It was a choice. He was offering her a way out, but he wasn't taking her arm or pulling her away. He was simply standing beside her, waiting to see what she would do. Lena's throat burned. She wanted to say something, "Thank you," or "I'm sorry," or "Who are you?" But the words wouldn't come. So she nodded, just once, and felt Reed Lawson step into place beside her. Together they walked through the crowd. The whispers started immediately, shocked, scandalized, delighted. Lena kept her eyes forward, her hand tight on Caleb's, and tried not to think about what this would cost her. Reed didn't speak. He just walked, steady and sure, as if escorting a woman through a hostile crowd was the most natural thing in the world. When they reached the edge of the square, away from the thickest press of people, Reed stopped and turned to her. "You all right?" Lena nodded, though her hands were shaking. "Why did you do that?" "Because it was the right thing to do." He glanced back at the crowd, then at her. "You work at Patterson's boarding house?" "Yes." "Then I'll see you around." He tipped his hat to her, then crouched down to Caleb's level. "You take care of your mama, all right?" Caleb, wide-eyed and silent, nodded. Reed stood, gave Lena one last long look, and walked away. Lena watched him go, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She didn't know who Reed Lawson was, didn't know why he had stepped forward when no one else would. But as she turned and carried her son back toward the boarding house, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next morning, Lena woke before dawn and went to work as usual. She scrubbed linens in the wash house behind the boarding house, her hands raw from lye soap, her back aching from bending over the tub. Mrs. Patterson, the boarding house owner, was a sharp-eyed widow who didn't ask questions and didn't tolerate gossip, which was the only reason Lena still had a job. But even Mrs. Patterson couldn't stop the whispers. By midday, the other women working in the kitchen were buzzing with talk of what had happened at the festival. Lena kept her head down and focused on wringing out a sheet, but she couldn't block out their voices. "Did you see Reed Lawson stand up for her?" "Right in front of Margaret Fairweather, too. I thought Margaret was going to faint." "What was he thinking? Everyone knows what kind of woman she is." "Maybe he doesn't care. Reed's always been different, never did follow the rules like the rest of them." Lena's hands stilled in the water. She wanted to tell them they were wrong, that she wasn't what they thought, that there was more to her story than the shame they saw. But she had learned that explanations only made things worse. People believed what they wanted to believe. The truth was irrelevant. She finished her work in silence and went to collect Caleb from the small room they shared on the top floor of the boarding house. He was playing with a wooden horse Reed had given him. No, not given. Left behind. She'd found it on the step outside their door that morning, wrapped in a scrap of cloth. No note, no explanation, just a gift. Lena picked up the horse and turned it over in her hands. It was beautifully carved, smooth and detailed, the kind of thing that took hours to make. She didn't know what to do with kindness like this. It felt dangerous, like something that would be taken away the moment she started to trust it. But Caleb loved it. He had been clutching it all morning, whispering stories to it, giving it a name, Star. Lena set the horse down and pulled Caleb into her lap. "You like that, sweet boy?" He nodded, his curls bouncing. "The man gave it to me, the one from yesterday." "I know. Is he nice?" Lena hesitated. "I think so." "Will he come back?" "I don't know." But she did know, because that afternoon when she took Caleb outside to sit in the shade behind the boarding house, Reed Lawson walked up the path carrying a basket of apples. Lena stood quickly, brushing dust from her skirt. "Mr. Lawson?" "Ma'am." He set the basket down on the step. "Thought you might be able to use these. Got more than I need from the orchard." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. But Lena nodded and accepted the gift because refusing would have been worse. "Thank you." Reed glanced at Caleb, who was peeking out from behind Lena's skirt. "How's Star doing?" Caleb's face lit up. "He's good. I'm teaching him to run fast." Reed smiled, a slow, genuine smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "That's important. A good horse needs to know how to run." He stayed for a few minutes, talking to Caleb about horses and answering the boy's endless questions with the kind of patience Lena had rarely seen in a man. And when he left, he tipped his hat to her again, his eyes holding hers for just a moment longer than necessary. "Take care, Miss Hart." She watched him walk away, the same way she had the day before. And again, she felt that dangerous flicker of hope. Reed came back the next day. And the day after that. He never stayed long, never made excuses. He would bring something, a jar of honey, a bundle of firewood, a book he thought Caleb might like, and spend a few minutes talking before he left. He didn't ask Lena about her past, didn't press her for explanations. He just showed up, steady and quiet, like the sunrise. And slowly, carefully, Lena began to let him in. She learned that Reed owned a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town, that he raised horses and kept mostly to himself. He wasn't part of the social circles that ruled Miller's Crossing, wasn't interested in the politics or the gossip. He worked hard, lived simply, and didn't seem to care what people thought of him. "Why are you doing this?" Lena asked him one afternoon, when he had brought Caleb a rope to practice knot tying. Reed looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Doing what?" "Spending time with us. Bringing us things. You know what people are saying?" "I don't care what people are saying." "You should. It'll make trouble for you." "Maybe." He shrugged. "But I've had trouble before. I'll manage." Lena crossed her arms, frustrated by his calmness. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're a good mother. I know you work hard. I know you've been hurt, and you're still standing." He met her eyes. "That's enough for me." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she wasn't worth the risk he was taking. but the words stuck in her throat, tangled with something she couldn't name. Instead, she said, "Thank you." And Reed, because he was Reed, just nodded. 3 weeks after the festival, Lena allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could stay. She had saved a little money. Caleb was happy. Reed had become a constant, quiet presence in their lives, teaching Caleb how to braid rope and telling him stories about the horses on his ranch. For the first time in years, Lena felt something that resembled peace. And then Margaret Fairweather came to the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson knocked on Lena's door just after breakfast, her face tight with worry. "There's someone here to see you, in the parlor." Lena's stomach dropped. "Who?" "Mrs. Fairweather." Lena closed her eyes. She had known this was coming, had felt it building like a storm on the horizon. She kissed Caleb's forehead, told him to stay in the room, and went downstairs. Margaret was waiting in the parlor, seated in the best chair, her hands folded in her lap. She looked at Lena the way someone might look at a stain on an expensive rug. "Miss Hart, please sit." Lena remained standing. "What do you want?" Margaret's smile was thin. "I'll be direct. Your presence in this town has become a problem. You've been seen associating with Mr. Lawson, and people are talking. It's inappropriate, unseemly, and it reflects poorly on all of us. I haven't done anything wrong." "You exist," Margaret said coldly. "That's enough. A woman with no husband and an illegitimate child has no place in a respectable community. I'm here to offer you a solution." Lena's hands clenched into fists. "What kind of solution?" "Leave, quietly. I'll arrange transportation and provide you with enough money to start over somewhere else. Somewhere far from here." She paused. "It's generous, Miss Hart. More than you deserve." Lena's vision blurred with rage and despair. She had heard this before, had taken the money once in the first town, thinking it would buy her peace, but there was no peace in running. Only more shame, more fear. "No." Margaret's eyebrows lifted. "Excuse me?" "I said no. I'm not leaving." "Then you're a fool." Margaret stood, her skirts rustling. "You think Reed Lawson will protect you? He's already damaged his reputation by associating with you. If you stay, you'll ruin him, and when he realizes that, he'll leave you just like everyone else has." The words hit like a fist to the chest, because Lena knew they were true. She had seen it before. Good people who tried to help only to be dragged down by association. She couldn't do that to Reed, couldn't let him sacrifice everything for her. Margaret saw the doubt in her face and smiled. "I'll give you 3 days to reconsider. After that, I'll make sure you're no longer welcome here, one way or another." She swept out of the parlor, leaving Lena standing alone in the silence. Lena sank into the chair Margaret had vacated, her legs too weak to hold her. She thought about the money she had saved, the towns she had already fled, the look in Caleb's eyes when she told him they had to leave again. And she thought about Reed, about the way he looked at her like she mattered, about the way he made her son laugh, about the impossible, fragile hope that maybe this time could be different. But hope, she knew, was a luxury she couldn't afford. That night, Lena packed their belongings. She moved slowly, mechanically, folding the few clothes they owned and tucking them into her worn bag. Caleb watched from the bed, clutching Star the wooden horse, his eyes wide and frightened. "Are we leaving, Mama?" Lena couldn't look at him. "Yes, sweet boy. But I don't want to leave. I like it here. I like Mr. Reed." "I know, but we have to." "Why?" "Because I'm poison. Because everywhere I go, I ruin things. Because I love you too much to let you grow up watching me be destroyed." "Because it's time," she said instead. Caleb's face crumpled. "Can Mr. Reed come with us?" Lena's throat closed. She knelt in front of her son and pulled him into her arms, breathing in the scent of his hair, memorizing the weight of him against her chest. "No, baby. He can't." She held him until he fell asleep, tears soaking into her shoulder. Then she finished packing and sat by the window, watching the stars and waiting for dawn. She would leave before Reed came by, before she had to see the disappointment in his eyes, before she had to explain that she was exactly what Margaret Fairweather said she was, a woman who brought nothing but trouble, But when the sun rose, Reed was already there. He was standing outside the boarding house, his hat in his hands, his eyes locked on her window. And when Lena saw him, she knew. He wasn't going to let her disappear. Lena stood frozen at the window, her packed bag sitting heavy on the floor behind her, Caleb still sleeping in the bed. Reed hadn't moved. He stood in the early morning light like a man who had all the time in the world, patient and immovable as stone. When their eyes met through the glass, he didn't look away, didn't demand, just waited. She pressed her palm against the cool window pane, her breath fogging the glass. Every instinct screamed at her to grab Caleb and slip out the back way, to disappear before Reed could ask questions she couldn't answer. But something in his steady gaze held her in place. Not force, but something quieter. Something that felt dangerously like faith. Lena turned from the window and looked at her sleeping son, at the bag packed with their entire lives, at the door that led to another town, another set of lies, another inevitable unraveling. She had run 3 times before, had promised herself each time that the next place would be different. But the problem, she was beginning to understand, wasn't the towns. It was her. It was the shame she carried like a second skin, the belief that she deserved every cruel word, every closed door, every pitying look. Margaret Fairweather's voice echoed in her mind. "You'll ruin him." Maybe that was true. Probably was. But standing here in this rented room with dawn breaking outside and Reed Lawson refusing to leave, Lena realized she was tired. Tired of running. Tired of protecting herself by staying small. Tired of teaching her son that love was something other people deserved, but never them. She smoothed her hair, straightened her dress, and walked downstairs. Reed was still there when she stepped outside, though he'd moved to sit on the porch step. He stood when he saw her, his hat turning slowly in his hands. "Morning," he said quietly. "You shouldn't be here." "Probably not." He glanced at the bag she'd left visible through the window. "You leaving?" Lena's jaw tightened. "I think it's best." "Best for who?" "For everyone. For you." She crossed her arms, defensive. "Margaret Fairweather came to see me yesterday. Told me I need to leave town. Said I was ruining your reputation." Reed's expression didn't change. "Margaret Fairweather doesn't speak for me." "Maybe not. But she speaks for this town. And she's right. People are talking. About you spending time with me, about what it means, about—" Her voice cracked. "I won't do that to you. I won't let you sacrifice everything because you feel sorry for me." "Is that what you think this is?" Reed took a step closer, his voice still calm but carrying an edge now. "Pity? What else would it be?" "Respect. Interest. The beginning of something that could matter, if you'd stop running long enough to find out." He held her gaze. "I know you've been hurt. I know people have given you every reason not to trust this. But I'm not asking you to trust me yet. I'm just asking you to stay." "Give me a chance to prove I mean what I say." Lena shook her head, her throat burning. "You don't understand. You don't know what people will do, what they'll say. It won't just be talk. It'll be your business, your livelihood, your place in this community. And for what? For me? I'm not worth that." Reed was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What if I think you are?" The words hit her like a physical blow. She had spent 4 years believing the opposite, had internalized every harsh judgment, every whispered condemnation, until she'd become exactly what they said she was. Worthless, shameful, undeserving of anything good. But Reed looked at her like none of that was true. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Do what?" "Stay. Believe someone actually wants me to." Reed's expression softened. "Then let me show you. One day at a time. No promises you can't keep, no expectations you can't meet. Just stay, see what happens." Behind her, through the open door, Lena heard Caleb stirring, heard the soft thump of small feet hitting the floor. In a moment, her son would come looking for her, would see the packed bag, would understand that once again they were leaving behind something good because his mother was too afraid to fight for it. She thought about the wooden horse Reed had carved, about the way Caleb's face lit up when Reed came by, about the feeling of walking through that hostile crowd with someone who refused to let her face it alone. 3 days, she said finally. Margaret gave me 3 days to leave. After that, she said she'd make sure I wasn't welcome here anymore. Reed's jaw tightened. Then we have 3 days to change your mind. You can't change Margaret Fairweather's mind. Nobody can. Maybe not. But I can make it clear that you're not alone. That if she wants you gone, she'll have to go through me first. He settled his hat back on his head. I'm going to the town meeting tonight. You should come with me. Lena's eyes widened. The town meeting? Reed, that's where everyone will be. All the people who've been talking, all the ones who think I should leave. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. If we're going to do this, we do it in the open. No hiding, no shame. You walk in there beside me and you show them you have every right to be part of this community. They'll destroy you. They'll try. Reed's smile was slight but genuine. But I'm harder to destroy than I look. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him this was insane, that he was risking everything for a woman who would only bring him down. But Caleb appeared in the doorway then, rubbing his eyes. Star, the horse, clutched against his chest. Mr. Reed! The boy's face broke into a sleepy grin. Are you staying for breakfast? Reed glanced at Lena, asking permission. She hesitated, then nodded. If your mama will have me, Reed said. They ate together in the boarding house kitchen, simple fare, biscuits, and eggs that Mrs. Patterson allowed Lena to prepare. Caleb chattered endlessly about the horse, about a bird he'd seen yesterday, about a story he wanted Reed to tell him. And Reed listened with the kind of attention most adults never gave children, asking questions, laughing at Caleb's observations, treating the boy like his words mattered. Lena watched them and felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crack. After breakfast, Reed left to tend his ranch, but not before extracting a promise from Lena that she'd meet him at the town hall that evening. She agreed, though the thought made her stomach twist with dread. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxious preparation. Lena unpacked their bags, though she couldn't quite bring herself to put everything away. Some part of her still convinced this would end in flight. She washed and mended her best dress, the one she'd been married in once, before everything fell apart. It was plain, faded from too many washings, but it was respectable. If she was going to face the town's judgment, she would do it with her head high. Caleb sensed her nervousness and grew clingy, following her from room to room, asking questions she couldn't quite answer. Why are you sad, Mama? Where are we going? Will Mr. Reed be there? Yes, she told him, Mr. Reed would be there. By the time evening came, Lena's hands were shaking so badly she could barely button her dress. Mrs. Patterson appeared in her doorway, her weathered face creased with concern. You don't have to do this, the older woman said. You could stay here tonight. Keep your head down until this blows over. It won't blow over, not unless I face it. Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're braver than you think, girl. Remember that when they start talking. Lena didn't feel brave. She felt terrified. But she took Caleb's hand and walked down the stairs anyway. Reed was waiting outside, dressed in clean work clothes, his hair still damp from washing. He looked at Lena, really looked at her, and something flickered in his eyes that might have been pride. You look beautiful, he said quietly. Lena flushed. I look plain. You look brave. That's better than beautiful. He offered his arm. Ready? No, she thought, but she nodded anyway. They walked through town as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the dusty streets in shades of gold and orange. People stared. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Women clutched their husbands' arms and whispered behind their hands. Men's expressions ranged from confusion to disapproval to something that looked like anger. Reed kept walking, his pace steady and unhurried. He didn't acknowledge the stares, didn't respond to the whispers. He just walked beside Lena like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she belonged there. Caleb skipped between them, oblivious to the tension, pointing out dogs and wagons and interesting rocks. His innocence was both heartbreaking and fortifying, a reminder of why this mattered, why she couldn't just keep running. The town hall was packed when they arrived. Miller's Crossing took its civic duties seriously, and monthly meetings drew most of the adult population. The room was arranged with wooden benches facing a raised platform where the mayor and town council sat. Lena recognized faces from the festival, from the mercantile, from church services she'd attended once before deciding she wasn't welcome. And there, in the front row, sat Margaret Fairweather. The older woman's eyes locked on Lena the moment she walked through the door. Her expression was cold, triumphant, like a cat who'd cornered a mouse. She leaned over and whispered something to the woman beside her, and both of them smiled. Reed guided Lena to a bench near the back. Caleb climbed into Lena's lap, and she held him close, grateful for his warm weight, for the reminder that she wasn't completely alone. The meeting began with the usual business: discussion of road repairs, debate over water rights, arguments about fence lines and grazing permits. Lena tried to focus on the mundane proceedings, tried to convince herself that maybe she could just sit here quietly and nobody would say anything, that maybe Margaret's threat had been empty. But 20 minutes in, Margaret stood. "Mr. Mayor, if I may address the council on a matter of community concern." The mayor, a balding man in his 50s, looked slightly pained but nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Fairweather." Margaret turned to face the room, her hands clasped primly in front of her. "I want to speak about the moral character of our town and the standards we uphold as a community. We've always prided ourselves on being respectable, decent, family-oriented people. We've built our homes and businesses on the foundation of Christian values and proper conduct." Lena's stomach dropped. She felt Reed stiffen beside her. "Recently," Margaret continued, "we've seen those values threatened by the presence of individuals who do not share our commitment to decency. Specifically, I'm referring to the woman currently residing at Patterson's boarding house, a woman with an illegitimate child and no husband who has already fled multiple towns due to her scandalous circumstances." The room erupted in murmurs. Heads turned. Lena felt dozens of eyes boring into her, felt the weight of judgment pressing down like a physical force. She wanted to sink into the floor, wanted to grab Caleb and run. But Reed's hand found hers beneath the bench, his grip warm and steady. "Furthermore," Margaret said, raising her voice over the noise, "this woman has been seen consorting with one of our most respected ranchers, Mr. Reed Lawson, in a manner that can only be described as inappropriate. She is clearly attempting to trap him into some sort of arrangement, to use his good name to legitimize her shameful situation. As a community, we cannot allow this. We must protect our own." The mayor cleared his throat. "Mrs. Fairweather, this is a town meeting, not a trial. I'm not sure this is the appropriate venue." "It is absolutely appropriate," Margaret snapped. "We have a right to determine who is welcome in our community and who is not. I am formally proposing that we ask Miss Hart to leave Miller's Crossing, for the good of everyone involved." The murmurs grew louder, some voices agreeing, others uncertain. Lena felt hot tears burning behind her eyes, felt the familiar urge to flee rising in her throat. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading, the moment when the town made official what she'd always known, that she didn't belong anywhere. She started to stand, ready to gather Caleb and leave with whatever dignity she had left. But Reed's hand tightened on hers, holding her in place. And then he stood instead. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Reed Lawson, standing tall in the back of the hall, his jaw set, his eyes blazing with something Lena had never seen before. Anger. Not at her. At them. "With all due respect, Mrs. Fairweather," Reed said, his voice carrying clear across the room, "you don't speak for this entire community. And you sure as hell don't speak for me." Margaret's face flushed. "Mr. Lawson, you're being manipulated." "I'm being what?" Reed's laugh was sharp, humorless. "Manipulated? By a woman who works 16-hour days washing other people's linens? By a mother who's doing everything she can to give her son a decent life? That's your definition of manipulation? She has a child out of wedlock. So what?" The words rang out like a gunshot. So what if she does? Does that make her less human, less deserving of respect, less worthy of a place to live and work and raise her boy in peace? Margaret sputtered. "It makes her immoral. It makes her human." Reed took a step forward. "We all make mistakes. We all carry things we wish we could change. The difference is, most of us get to hide our mistakes behind closed doors and respectable marriages and polite silence. Miss Hart doesn't have that luxury. Her mistake is visible. And you're using that visibility to justify cruelty." The room was utterly silent now. People stared at Reed like they'd never seen him before. Maybe they hadn't. Not like this. Not standing up in public, not challenging the social order, not defending someone who had no power to defend herself. I've known most of you my whole life, Reed continued, his voice quieter now but no less intense. And I've seen how quick we are to judge, how eager we are to draw lines between us and them, how comfortable we are with cruelty as long as we can call it righteousness. He looked around the room, meeting eyes, holding gazes. But I won't be part of that anymore. Miss Hart hasn't done anything to any of you. She's not asking for charity or special treatment. She just wants to work and raise her son in peace. And if that's too much for this town to allow, then maybe the problem isn't with her. Margaret drew herself up, her face tight with fury. Are you suggesting that we lower our standards? That we accept anyone regardless of their moral failings? I'm suggesting we practice the mercy we claim to believe in. Reed's eyes found Lena's across the room, and something in his expression made her chest ache. I'm suggesting we give people a chance to prove who they are, instead of defining them by their worst moments. And I'm suggesting that if we can't do that, then we're not as decent as we think we are. He paused, then added quietly, Miss Hart is staying. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. The silence that followed was deafening. Lena sat frozen, barely breathing, Caleb's weight heavy in her lap. She couldn't believe what she'd just heard, couldn't process that someone, that Reed, had just put his entire reputation on the line for her, in front of everyone. The mayor cleared his throat uncomfortably. Well, I think we can all agree this has gotten rather heated. Perhaps we should table this discussion and— There's nothing to discuss, Reed said flatly. Miss Hart is a resident of this town. She has as much right to be here as anyone. No vote is going to change that. Margaret's mouth opened and closed, her face mottled with rage. But before she could respond, another voice spoke up from the middle of the room. Reed's right. Lena turned and saw Thomas Garrett, the blacksmith, standing. He was a big man with scarred hands and a reputation for bluntness. I'm not saying I approve of the situation, but the woman hasn't caused any trouble. She works hard, keeps to herself. Seems like we're making a problem where there isn't one. A few other voices murmured agreement. Not many, but enough to show that Margaret didn't have complete control. This is outrageous, Margaret hissed. You're all willing to overlook her sins because Reed Lawson asks you to? What kind of community? The kind that minds its own business, Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the noise. The boarding house owner stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. That girl has worked for me for 6 weeks. Never missed a day, never complained, never caused a moment of trouble. She's a better employee than half the lazy gossips in this room. She shot Margaret a pointed look. Maybe if some people spent less time worrying about other folks' morals and more time examining their own, we'd all be better off. A shocked laugh rippled through the crowd. Margaret looked like she'd been slapped. The mayor stood quickly, sensing the meeting was spiraling out of control. I think we've heard enough perspectives for tonight. Unless there are any actual town business matters to discuss, I suggest we adjourn. No one spoke. The mayor banged his gavel, and people began to file out, their voices rising in urgent conversation the moment they reached the door. Some cast sympathetic glances at Lena. More shot her looks of disgust or disapproval, but they left, and Lena was still there. Reed waited until most of the crowd had cleared before turning to her. You all right? Lena couldn't speak, couldn't form words around the tangle of emotions in her chest. Gratitude, terror, disbelief, something that felt dangerously like love. So she just nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. Reed helped her stand, then crouched in front of Caleb. You did real good tonight, buddy. Sat real quiet. Caleb yawned. Are we going home now? Home. The word pierced Lena's heart, because Caleb still believed they had one. Yeah, Reed said softly, glancing up at Lena. Let's get you home. They walked back through the dark streets, Caleb dozing against Reed's shoulder, Lena too overwhelmed to speak. When they reached the boarding house, Reed set Caleb gently on his feet. I meant what I said in there, he told Lena. Every word. I know, her voice was barely a whisper. But Reed, you don't understand what you've done. Margaret won't forgive this. She'll come after you now. Your business, your reputation, let her try. His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away the tears still falling. I've spent too much of my life playing it safe, keeping my head down, not making waves. And for what? So people like Margaret Fairweather can decide who deserves dignity and who doesn't. He shook his head. I'm done with that. I'd rather stand for something that matters. Even if it costs you everything? Even then. His eyes searched hers. You're not alone anymore, Lena. Not unless you choose to be. Lena's breath caught. No one had called her by her first name, her real name, in months. She'd been Miss Hart, or that woman, or nothing at all. But Reed said her name like it meant something, like she meant something. I don't know how to trust this, she whispered. Then don't. Not yet. Reed stepped back, giving her space. Just don't run. Give me time to prove I'm not going anywhere. That's all I'm asking. Lena looked down at Caleb, who was watching them both with sleepy, confused eyes. She thought about the packed bag still sitting in her room, about the 3 towns she'd already fled, about the cycle of shame and fear that had defined her life for 4 years. And she thought about Reed standing in that town hall, risking everything for her. Not because he pitied her, not because he wanted to save her, but because he believed she deserved better than what she'd been given. Okay, she said finally. I'll stay. Reed's smile was like sunrise. Okay. He left them at the door, tipping his hat one last time before disappearing into the night. Lena carried Caleb upstairs, tucked him into bed, and then sat by the window for a long time, watching the stars and trying to understand what had just happened. For the first time in 4 years, someone had fought for her. Not quietly, not behind closed doors, but publicly. Loudly. Without shame. And for the first time in 4 years, Lena allowed herself to believe that maybe she deserved it. The morning after the town meeting, Lena woke to find a basket on the boarding house steps. Inside were fresh eggs, a loaf of bread still warm from the oven, and a jar of preserves. No note, but she recognized the handwriting on the cloth covering the bread, Mrs. Patterson's angular script that simply read, "For your breakfast." It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Someone besides Reed was willing to acknowledge her existence without contempt. Lena carried the basket inside and made breakfast for Caleb, her hands still trembling slightly from the previous night's events. She kept replaying Reed's words in her mind, the way his voice had rung out through that packed hall, the looks on people's faces when he'd refused to back down. Part of her still couldn't believe it had happened. Part of her was waiting for him to realize his mistake and disappear. But when she took Caleb outside after breakfast, Reed was already there, leaning against the porch rail like he'd been waiting for hours. "Morning?" he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You're here early. Wanted to make sure you hadn't changed your mind about staying." His tone was light, but there was genuine concern beneath it. "I haven't changed my mind." Lena glanced around, noting the few people passing on the street who openly stared. "But I think you should know, people are talking." "People are always talking." Reed crouched down as Caleb ran over. "Hey there, buddy. You sleep all right?" Caleb nodded enthusiastically. "Mama said we're not leaving anymore." "That's right. You're staying put." Reed pulled something from his pocket, a small carved bird this time. "I made this for you. Thought you might like it." Caleb's face lit up as he examined the delicate wooden sparrow. "It's perfect. Can you teach me how to make things like this?" "Sure can. Maybe this afternoon, if your mama says it's all right." Caleb turned pleading eyes on Lena. "Can I, Mama? Please?" Lena hesitated. Letting Reed deeper into their lives felt dangerous, like opening a door she might not be able to close. But Caleb was looking at her with such hope, and Reed was waiting with that patient expression he wore so well, and she was tired of saying no to every good thing that came their way. "All right, but you mind your manners." "I will!" Caleb clutched his new bird and ran off to show Mrs. Patterson. Reed stood, brushing dust from his knees. "I was thinking, if you're not working today, maybe you and Caleb could come out to the ranch, see the horses, get some air away from town." "Reed, I don't think that's a good idea. After last night, everyone knows where I stand. Hiding won't change anything." His voice softened. "Besides, Caleb would love it, and you could use a break from all the staring." He was right about that. The weight of constant scrutiny was exhausting. Every trip to the mercantile or walk through town an exercise in endurance. The thought of open space, of breathing without feeling watched, it was almost irresistible. "Just for the afternoon," she said finally. Reed's smile was worth the risk. They borrowed Mrs. Patterson's wagon and drove out of town as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning cool. The road wound through scrub brush and rocky outcroppings, following a creek that ran low this time of year. Caleb chattered constantly, pointing out birds and asking endless questions about everything they passed. Reed answered each one with the same careful attention he always gave the boy, never dismissive, never impatient. Lena sat between them on the wagon seat and tried to remember the last time she'd felt this close to peaceful. It had been years, before Caleb was born, before everything fell apart, back when she'd still believed her life could be ordinary and good. She'd learned not to trust peace since then, had learned that contentment was usually just the quiet before the next disaster. But sitting here in the warm sun with her son laughing and Reed's steady presence beside her, she let herself pretend, just for a moment, that this could last. Reed's ranch appeared around a bend in the road, a modest spread with a sturdy house, a barn that had seen better days, and several corrals where horses grazed in the shade. It wasn't grand, but it was clearly loved. The fences were mended, the barn doors hung straight, the house had fresh paint on the shutters. "It's not much," Reed said, suddenly seeming self-conscious, "but it's home." "It's beautiful," Lena said, and meant it. Caleb was already scrambling down from the wagon, running toward the nearest corral where a bay mare watched with calm curiosity. Reed caught up with him quickly, lifting the boy so he could see over the fence rails. "This is Sable," Reed said. "She's gentle as a lamb. You want to pet her?" Caleb nodded vigorously, and Reed guided his small hand to the mare's soft nose. The horse snuffled at the boy's palm, and Caleb dissolved into delighted giggles. Lena watched from a distance, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. This was the life she'd dreamed of once, a home, a partner who was good to her child, simple moments of joy unmarred by shame or fear. But dreams like that weren't for women like her. Were they? Reed glanced back at her as if sensing her thoughts. "Come meet her. She's friendly." Lena approached slowly, unused to being around animals this large. Reed took her hand, the touch still sent warmth through her, and guided it to Sable's neck. The mare's coat was warm and silky beneath her fingers. "See? Nothing to be afraid of." "I'm not afraid of the horse," Lena said quietly. Reed studied her face. "What are you afraid of then?" Everything, she wanted to say, that this kindness would evaporate, that she'd wake up and find it was all some cruel dream, that she'd ruined this good thing like she'd ruined everything else. But Caleb was watching them with bright, happy eyes, and she couldn't voice those fears in front of him. "Nothing," she lied. "Nothing at all." Reed didn't look convinced, but he let it drop. He spent the next hour showing Caleb around the ranch, pointing out the different horses, explaining what each one was trained for, letting the boy help measure out feed. Lena followed at a distance, content to watch this glimpse of a life she'd never thought she could have. When Caleb finally wore himself out, Reed suggested they eat the lunch he'd packed. They sat in the shade of a cottonwood near the creek, spreading food on a blanket: bread, cheese, cold chicken, apples from the same basket he'd brought weeks ago. Caleb ate ravenously, then curled up on the blanket and fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by excitement and fresh air. Lena sat with her back against the tree trunk, watching the water drift past. Reed settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, but not touching. The silence between them was comfortable, unmarred by the need to fill it with words. "Can I ask you something?" Reed said finally. Lena's shoulders tensed. "You can ask. I might not answer." "That's fair." He picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his fingers. "What happened? With Caleb's father, I mean. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I'd like to understand." Lena was quiet for a long time. She'd told this story exactly once, to the first town she'd fled to, and the telling had only made things worse. People didn't want truth. They wanted scandal or tragedy, something that fit their expectations. But Reed wasn't people. He'd already proven that. "His name was James," she said softly. "We met in St. Louis. I was working in a dress shop, and he used to come in to buy things for his mother. He was charming, educated, said all the right things." She paused, the memories bitter even now. "I was 19 and stupid enough to believe him." "You weren't stupid." "I was naive. There's a difference, but the result's the same." Lena pulled her knees to her chest. He said he loved me. Said we'd get married as soon as he settled some business matters. I believed him right up until the moment I told him I was carrying his child. Reed's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. He left that same night. Didn't even have the courage to tell me to my face. Just left a note saying he'd made a mistake, that he couldn't marry someone of my station, that his family would never accept it. Lena's voice was flat now, emptied of emotion by repetition. I tried to find him, but he'd already left the city. His family claimed they didn't know where he'd gone. Maybe that was true. Maybe he told them to lie. It doesn't matter now. What did you do? I tried to keep working, but once I started showing, the shop owner let me go, said I was bad for business. I stayed with a friend for a while, but her landlord found out and threatened to evict her if I didn't leave. So I left. She stared at the creek, watching the water flow past like time she could never reclaim. I had Caleb in a charity hospital. The nurses were kind, but they made sure I understood what I was, a fallen woman who'd made her bed and now had to lie in it. You were a woman who'd been lied to and abandoned. That's not how the world sees it. Lena turned to look at him. Don't you understand, Reed? It doesn't matter what the truth is. What matters is what people believe. And what they believe is that I'm immoral, that I seduced a man, got pregnant on purpose to trap him, and when that didn't work, I became a burden on decent society. That's not what I believe. You're one person. Margaret Fairweather speaks for dozens more. Lena's voice cracked. You stood up for me last night, and I'm grateful. More grateful than I can say. But that doesn't change the facts. I have a son and no husband. Every day I stay here, I make your life harder. Every time you're seen with me, you lose respect. Eventually, it'll cost you business. Customers who don't want to work with the man who courted a fallen woman. Neighbors who stop speaking to you. It won't happen all at once, but it'll happen. Reed was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the sleeping child between them. You know what I see when I look at you? Someone to pity. Someone who's survived things that would have broken most people. Someone who works hard, loves her son, and keeps going even when the whole world tells her she's not worth the effort. He turned to face her fully. I see someone brave, someone real, someone I want to know better. Lena shook her head, tears burning her eyes. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying I don't give a damn what Margaret Fairweather thinks. I don't give a damn what this town thinks. I care about what's true and what's right. His hand found hers, calloused fingers threading through her smaller ones. And the truth is, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the day I saw you at that festival. Not because I pity you, because I admire you. Because when I talk to you, I feel like I'm talking to someone who understands what it means to fight for something that matters. Reed, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow, he continued, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. I'm not asking you to trust me completely or believe that everything will be perfect. I'm just asking you to give us a real chance. Let me court you properly. Let me show you what it looks like when a man keeps his word. Lena wanted to say yes. Wanted it so badly it frightened her. But fear was a habit 4 years in the making, and habits were hard to break. What if it doesn't work? What if I disappoint you? Then we'll deal with it together. Reed's voice was steady, certain. But I think you're stronger than you believe, and I think you deserve a chance to find out. Caleb stirred in his sleep, murmuring something about horses. They both looked down at him, this small person who'd already endured more upheaval than any child should have to bear. Lena thought about the wooden toys Reed had carved, about the patience he showed, about the way Caleb's whole face changed when Reed arrived. He loves you already, she whispered. I love him too. And I'm starting to love his mother, if she'll let me. The words hung in the air between them, terrifying and wonderful. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd been loved before, or thought she had, and it had destroyed her. But Reed wasn't James. He'd already proven that in 100 small ways and one very large one in front of the entire town. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. Reed smiled slightly. But I'd rather be scared and try than safe and always wonder what might have been. Lena looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd walked into her life like an answer to a prayer she'd been too ashamed to speak aloud. He wasn't perfect. His ranch was modest, his life was simple, and his decision to stand with her would cost him. But he was good. Genuinely, deeply good in a way she'd stopped believing men could be. "All right," she said softly. "Court me then. But Reed, if this goes badly, if people make your life impossible because of me, I need you to promise you'll tell me. I won't let you sacrifice everything for someone like me." "Someone like you," Reed repeated, his voice firm, "is exactly who I want. Stop selling yourself short, Lena. You're worth the fight." She wanted to believe him, wanted it desperately. So she squeezed his hand and let herself imagine, just for a moment, that he might be right. They stayed by the creek until late afternoon, talking in low voices while Caleb slept between them. Reed told her about his parents, both gone now, about learning to work horses from his father and cook from his mother, about the lonely years after they died, running the ranch by himself, watching other men marry and start families while he stayed solitary, waiting for something he couldn't name. "Maybe I was waiting for you," he said, only half joking. Lena told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her mother who died when she was young, about her father who'd been kind but distant, about dreams of becoming a teacher, plans that dissolved when James came along with his pretty words and empty promises. "I was going to change the world," she said with bitter amusement. "Teach children, make a difference. Look at me now. You're making a difference. You're raising a good boy who'll grow up knowing his mother fought for him, that she didn't give up no matter how hard things got. That's not nothing. It feels like nothing sometimes." "It's not." Reed's voice was certain. "Trust me on that." When Caleb woke, they drove back to town in the golden light of early evening. The ride back felt different from the ride out, heavier with possibility, weighted with the understanding that something between them had shifted. They weren't just two people being kind to each other anymore. They were courting. Reed had said the words, and Lena had agreed, and now there was no going back. The town was quiet when they arrived, most people inside for supper. Reed walked Lena and Caleb to the boarding house door, Caleb chattering sleepily about all the horses he'd met. "Thank you for today," Lena said. It was perfect. It was just the beginning." Reed's hand lingered on hers for a moment. "I'll see you tomorrow?" "Yes." He smiled, tipped his hat, and walked away. Lena watched him go, her heart full of hope and terror in equal measure. Inside, Mrs. Patterson was waiting in the parlor. Her expression was grave. "You've had visitors," the older woman said without preamble. Lena's stomach dropped. "What kind of visitors?" "Margaret Fairweather and two of her friends. They came by this afternoon, said they needed to speak with you urgently." Mrs. Patterson's mouth tightened. "I told them you were out, and I didn't know when you'd be back." "They weren't pleased." "Did they say what they wanted?" "They didn't have to. It was clear enough." Mrs. Patterson stood, her expression softening slightly. "They're going to make trouble, girl. More than they already have. You need to be ready for that." Lena nodded, though her hands were shaking. She'd known this was coming, had known from the moment Reed spoke up at the town meeting that Margaret wouldn't let it rest. Women like Margaret Fairweather didn't forgive public humiliation. That night, Lena lay awake long after Caleb fell asleep, staring at the ceiling and trying to prepare herself for whatever came next. She thought about packing their bags again, about running before things got worse. But then she remembered Reed's hand in hers, his steady voice saying she was worth the fight, and she forced herself to stay still. She'd spent 4 years running. Maybe it was time to stand. The next morning, she found out what Margaret's visit had been about. The notice was posted on the door of the mercantile, written in Margaret's elegant script on expensive paper. It was an invitation to a special town gathering to be held the following Sunday, a gathering to discuss community standards and the protection of moral values. The language was careful, never mentioning Lena by name, but everyone would know what it meant. Lena stood in front of the notice, reading it 3 times, her heart sinking with each word. This wasn't just gossip anymore. This was organized opposition. Margaret was rallying the town to officially drive her out. "Don't let it scare you. She turned to find Thomas Garrett, the blacksmith who'd spoken up at the last meeting. He was a big man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Easy for you to say," Lena replied quietly. "No, it's not. I know what Margaret's capable of when she sets her mind to something." He glanced at the notice, then back at her. "But I also know Reed Lawson. And if he's decided you're worth standing for, then you probably are. Reed doesn't make friends easily, but when he does, he's loyal to the bone." "That's what I'm afraid of. He's going to ruin himself for me." Thomas shook his head. "Reed's tougher than you think, and he's not alone. There are people in this town who are tired of Margaret Fairweather deciding who gets to belong and who doesn't. You might be surprised who stands with you when it matters." He walked away before Lena could respond, leaving her staring at the notice and wondering if he was right. Wondering if there was any chance at all that this could end in anything other than disaster. Reed found her an hour later, sitting on the boarding house steps with Caleb playing nearby. He'd already seen the notice. His face told her that much. "You all right?" he asked, sitting beside her. "I don't know." Lena's voice was barely audible. "Reed, this is getting out of hand. Margaret's not going to stop until she's driven me out or destroyed your reputation in the process. Maybe both. Let her try." "You keep saying that, but you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Reed turned to face her, his expression intense. "I understand that Margaret Fairweather is a bully who uses her money and status to control people. I understand that she's scared of anything that challenges her authority. And I understand that if we back down now, we're telling her that cruelty wins. And if we don't back down, then we fight. Together." He took her hand, not caring who saw. "Lena, I meant what I said yesterday. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens at that gathering, we'll face it side by side. You're not alone in this anymore." Lena wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love and loyalty could triumph over social pressure and organized opposition, but she'd been hurt too many times to believe in fairy tale endings. Still, when Reed squeezed her hand and smiled at her like she was something precious, she couldn't quite bring herself to let go. The week leading up to the gathering was tense. Lena felt the weight of the town's attention everywhere she went. Some people offered small kindnesses, a nod in passing, a brief smile, Mrs. Patterson's continued support. But more people turned away, crossed the street to avoid her, whispered just loudly enough for her to hear. Reed came by every day, steady as sunrise. He brought Caleb more carved animals, taught him to tie knots and identify bird calls. He sat with Lena in the evenings after Caleb was asleep, talking about everything and nothing, slowly building something that felt like trust. And on Saturday night, the day before the gathering, he asked her a question that changed everything. "When this is over," he said quietly, "when we've gotten through whatever Margaret throws at us, will you marry me?" Lena stared at him, speechless. "Reed, we've only been courting for a week." "I know, and I'm not asking you to answer now. I'm just asking you to think about it, to consider that this could be permanent, that I'm not just defending you because it's right. I'm defending you because I want to build a life with you, you and Caleb both." "You're insane," she whispered, but there were tears in her eyes. "Probably," Reed smiled. "But I'd rather be insane with you than sensible without you. Just think about it. That's all I'm asking." Lena thought about it all night, lying awake in the darkness, listening to Caleb's soft breathing. She thought about James, who'd promised everything and delivered nothing, about the 3 towns she'd fled, about the shame she'd carried like chains for 4 years. And she thought about Reed, who looked at her like she was worth something, who played with her son like he was precious, who stood up in front of the entire town and said she deserved dignity. When morning came, Lena dressed in her best clothes, braided her hair, and prepared to face whatever judgment the town had prepared for her. But this time, she wasn't facing it alone. This time, she had Reed. And for the first time in 4 years, she had hope. The morning of the gathering dawned clear and merciless, the kind of Wyoming sky that seemed to stretch forever without offering anywhere to hide. Lena stood at her window watching the sun climb, her stomach twisted in knots. She'd barely slept, her mind cycling through every possible outcome, most of them ending with her and Caleb on the road again, homeless and broken. But when she looked down at her son, still sleeping with Star, the wooden horse clutched against his chest, she felt something harden in her spine. She was tired of running, tired of teaching Caleb that they didn't deserve to stay anywhere, tired of letting other people's cruelty define her worth. If Margaret Fairweather wanted to humiliate her in front of the town, then so be it. But Lena wouldn't go quietly this time. She wouldn't hang her head and accept shame she didn't deserve. Reed had shown her that much, that dignity was something you claimed for yourself, not something others granted you. She dressed carefully in the same faded dress she'd worn to the first town meeting, then woke Caleb and got him ready. He sensed her tension and grew quiet, his usual morning chatter subdued. As she braided his hair, his small hand found hers. "Are people going to be mean again, Mama?" Lena's throat tightened. "Maybe. Some of them. But Mr. Reed will be there?" "Yes, he'll be there." Caleb nodded, seeming reassured by this. "Then it'll be okay." Lena wished she had a child's faith in simple solutions, but she kissed his forehead and tried to borrow some of his certainty. Mrs. Patterson was waiting downstairs with a basket of food. "You'll need your strength," she said gruffly. "Whatever happens today." "You don't have to stand with me," Lena said quietly. "This could hurt your business too." "Child, I'm 63 years old. I've been running this boarding house for 30 years, and I've seen every kind of human ugliness there is. I learned a long time ago that the only thing worth protecting is your own sense of right and wrong." She pressed the basket into Lena's hands. "You haven't done anything wrong. Don't let them convince you otherwise." The words were a gift Lena hadn't known she needed. She hugged the older woman quickly, surprising them both, then took Caleb's hand and walked out into the bright morning. Reed was already waiting on the street, dressed in his Sunday best, clean shirt, pressed trousers, a jacket that looked like it hadn't been worn in years. His hair was combed back, his boots polished, but it was his eyes that caught Lena's attention. Steady, certain, holding no trace of doubt. "You look beautiful," he said when she reached him. Lena glanced down at her worn dress. "I look plain." "You look brave. That's better." He offered his arm. "Ready?" "No, but I'm here anyway." "That's all that matters." They walked through town together, Caleb between them holding both their hands. It was earlier than the scheduled gathering time, but people were already moving toward the town hall. Lena felt their stares like physical weight, felt the whispers chase her down the street. But Reed's presence beside her was an anchor, solid and unmoving. When they reached the hall, it was already half full. Margaret Fairweather stood near the front, surrounded by her usual circle of well-dressed supporters. She saw Lena enter, and her expression sharpened with something that looked like satisfaction. This was what she'd wanted, Lena present, to witness her own condemnation. Reed guided Lena to a bench in the middle of the room, not hiding in the back but not seeking confrontation in the front either. Thomas Garrett was already there, and he nodded at them as they sat. A few other faces looked friendly or at least neutral. The baker's wife, who'd once smiled at Caleb, a young couple Lena had seen at the mercantile, an older man who raised sheep on the edge of town. But more faces were hostile or coldly curious, waiting to see blood spilled. The room filled quickly. By the time Mayor Harrison called the meeting to order, there wasn't an empty seat. People lined the walls, crowded in the doorway. The whole town, it seemed, had turned out to witness this. "Thank you all for coming," the mayor began, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Fairweather has called this special gathering to address matters of community concern. Mrs. Fairweather, you have the floor." Margaret stood, smoothing her expensive silk dress. She looked every inch the town matriarch, elegant, composed, utterly certain of her authority. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the packed room. "My friends, we gather today because our community faces a moral crisis. For weeks now, we have tolerated a situation that threatens the very foundation of our values, the presence among us of a woman of questionable character who flaunts her shameful circumstances and corrupts good men with her wiles." Lena felt Reed tense beside her, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Margaret continued, warming to her subject. "This woman came to our town under false pretenses, hiding her true nature, seeking to embed herself in our community despite having no legitimate claim to respectability. She has a child born out of wedlock, no husband, no family willing to claim her. She has been driven from multiple towns before this one, leaving a trail of scandal in her wake." "That's not true," Lena said quietly, but her voice was lost in the murmur of the crowd. "Furthermore," Margaret's voice rose, She has now set her sights on one of our most respected citizens, Mr. Reed Lawson, clearly hoping to trap him into marriage and legitimize her shameful situation. We have all witnessed Mr. Lawson's unfortunate attachment to this woman, an attachment that does him no credit and threatens his standing in this community. Reed stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The room fell silent. "Are you finished, Mrs. Fairweather?" His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Margaret's eyes flashed. "Mr. Lawson, please sit down. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me directly, since you just spent 5 minutes talking about my personal affairs." Reed didn't sit. "You say Miss Hart is trying to trap me. I say she's done nothing of the kind. Every step we've taken toward courting has been my choice, my initiative. If anyone's doing the pursuing here, it's me." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. Margaret's face flushed. "You're being manipulated." "I'm a grown man who makes his own decisions." Reed's voice cut across hers. "I understand you don't approve. I understand you think Miss Hart isn't good enough for your precious standards. But here's what you need to understand. I don't care. I'm going to court her. I'm going to marry her if she'll have me. And there's nothing you or anyone else in this room can do to stop me." The silence that followed was absolute. Lena sat frozen, her heart pounding so hard she thought the whole room must hear it. Reed had just declared his intentions publicly, irrevocably. There was no taking it back now. Margaret recovered quickly, her voice turning sharp. "Then you're a fool, Mr. Lawson, and this town has no obligation to enable your foolishness. We have every right to protect our community's moral standards by refusing to do business with those who flaunt them." Is that a threat? It's a statement of fact. If you insist on this inappropriate attachment, you'll find that many in this community will no longer wish to associate with you. Your business will suffer. Your standing will diminish. All because you've chosen to tie yourself to a woman of ill repute. Reed smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Let me save you all some time. Anyone who wants to stop doing business with me because I'm courting Lena Hart, go ahead. Stop right now. I don't want your money if it comes with conditions about who I can love. Anyone who wants to stop speaking to me, stop inviting me to social gatherings, stop treating me like a human being, please, do it now. Make it clear where you stand." He looked around the room, meeting eyes, daring people to act on their prejudices. Some people shifted uncomfortably, others stared back defiantly. "But understand this," Reed continued, his voice dropping lower, more intense. "If you take that road, you're not just rejecting me. You're saying that a woman's worth is determined by her worst moment. You're saying that one mistake, or even just one piece of bad luck, defines a person forever. You're saying there's no such thing as second chances, no possibility of redemption, no mercy for anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Is that really the kind of community you want to be?" An uncomfortable silence followed. Then a voice spoke from the back of the room. "I don't think it is." Everyone turned. It was Sarah Mitchell, the baker's wife, a woman in her 40s with flour-dusted hands and a reputation for kindness. She stood slowly, her face flushed but determined. "I've been listening to all this talk about moral standards and community values, and I keep thinking about my own sister. She was 16 when a man twice her age got her with child and then abandoned her. My parents threw her out. The whole town condemned her. She died in poverty 3 years later because nobody would help a fallen woman." Sarah's voice shook. "I've regretted my silence about that for 20 years. I won't be silent now." Margaret's face hardened. "Mrs. Mitchell, your sister's tragic situation is hardly comparable." "It's exactly comparable. She was judged. She was condemned. She was driven out. And she died because people like you decided she didn't deserve compassion." Sarah looked at Lena directly. "I don't know your whole story, Miss Hart, but I know you work hard. I know you love your boy. I know you've done nothing to harm anyone in this town. That's enough for me." Another voice joined in, this time from the side of the room. It was James Cooper, a young rancher who'd only been in town a year himself. "I came to Miller's Crossing because I heard it was a good place to start over. A place where a man could make something of himself regardless of where he came from. Seems like that should apply to women too." Then Thomas Garrett stood. "I said it before and I'll say it again. Miss Hart hasn't caused any trouble. She minds her business, does her work, raises her child. If that's not respectable, I don't know what is. One by one, other voices began to speak. Not everyone, not even close to a majority, but enough to show that Margaret's control wasn't absolute. Enough to show that some people valued mercy over judgment. Margaret's face grew tighter with each defection. Finally, she held up her hand for silence. "This is very touching," she said coldly, "but it doesn't change the facts. Miss Hart is an unwed mother. That is a reality we cannot simply overlook because Mr. Lawson has developed an unfortunate attachment. We have standards in this community, and those standards exist for good reason, to protect our children, our families, our way of life." "Your standards," Reed said quietly, "or everyone's?" "The standards of decent people everywhere. The standards that let you decide who's decent and who's not. The standards that give you power over other people's lives." Reed's voice was sharp now, cutting. "That's what this is really about, isn't it, Mrs. Fairweather? Not morality, not community values, power. You can't stand that I'm not asking your permission, that Lena's not begging for your approval, that we're building something that doesn't require your blessing." Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "You have no right. I have every right. This is my life. Lena's life. We're not hurting anyone. We're not asking anyone for anything except basic human decency. And if you can't give us that, then the problem isn't with us. It's with you." The room erupted in noise, some people shouting agreement, others arguing against it, everyone talking over each other. The mayor banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. In the chaos, Lena felt a small hand slip into hers. She looked down to see Caleb looking up at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Mama, why are they yelling?" Lena pulled him close, her own fear momentarily forgotten in the need to comfort him. "It's all right, sweet boy. They're just talking." "Are we in trouble?" "No, we're not in trouble." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure it was true. The room felt like it was tearing itself apart, the careful social fabric of the town unraveling in real time, and it was all because of her. Because she dared to stay, dared to accept Reed's courtship, dared to believe she deserved something better than endless flight and shame. The mayor finally managed to restore a semblance of order. "Please, everyone, calm down. This isn't helping anyone." Margaret drew herself up, her face rigid with barely controlled fury. "Mr. Mayor, I move that we take a formal vote. Let this community decide once and for all whether Miss Hart is welcome here or whether she should be asked to leave for the good of all concerned." A shocked silence fell. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. A formal vote meant official rejection, a public condemnation that would follow her to every town she fled to next. It meant making her exile permanent, indelible. Reed's hand found hers, squeezing tight. "No," Margaret turned to him. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no. You don't get to vote on whether a person deserves to exist in this community. That's not how this works." Reed's voice was shaking now, with anger or fear or both. "Lena Hart hasn't broken any laws. She hasn't hurt anyone. She has every right to be here that any of us do. You can't just vote her out because you don't approve of her circumstances." "We absolutely can," Margaret said coldly. "This community has the right to determine its own standards and enforce them as we see fit. By driving out anyone who doesn't fit your definition of acceptable, by making an example of a woman who's already been through hell, what kind of community does that make us?" Thomas Garrett stood again. "Reed's right. This isn't right. Whatever we think about Miss Hart's situation, voting to exile her is cruel. It's unchristian. It's wrong." "Then what do you propose?" Margaret's voice was acid. "That we simply accept anyone, regardless of their moral failings? That we abandon all standards?" "I propose we judge people by their actions, not their pasts, by how they treat others, not by their mistakes." Thomas looked around the room. "Miss Hart has been here 6 weeks. Has she caused trouble? Stirred up problems? Hurt anyone? No, she's worked hard, kept to herself, and raised her boy. That's all we should care about." "Hear, hear," someone called from the back, but other voices rose in opposition. "She's corrupting our youth with her example. She's leading Reed Lawson astray. We have to think of our own children, what message this sends." The argument raged back and forth, the room splitting into factions. Lena sat in the middle of it all, holding Caleb, feeling like she was drowning. This was worse than simple rejection. This was the entire town tearing itself apart over her existence, good people being forced to choose sides, friendships fracturing under the weight of moral absolutes. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She stood, and something in the movement made the room fall quiet. All eyes turned to her. "Stop," she said, her voice barely audible. Then louder, "Please, just stop." Margaret's eyebrows rose. "Miss Hart, I don't think—" "I know what you think, Mrs. Fairweather. You've made it very clear." Lena's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to keep talking. "You think I'm worthless, shameful, a stain on your community. You think I came here to trap a good man and corrupt your children and destroy everything you hold dear." She took a breath, steadying herself. "But you're wrong. I came here because I was desperate, because I had nowhere else to go, because I wanted to give my son a chance at a normal life, even if I couldn't have one myself. I didn't come here to cause trouble. I came here to disappear." The room was utterly silent now. Even Caleb had stopped fidgeting, sensing the importance of this moment. "You want to know the truth about me?" Lena's voice cracked. "Fine. Here it is. I fell in love with a man who lied to me, who promised me everything and gave me nothing except a child and a lifetime of shame. I was 19 and stupid, and I believed him when he said he loved me. When I told him I was pregnant, he ran, left me with nothing, no money, no family, no way to survive except charity and judgment." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. "I tried to do the right thing, tried to find work, to support myself, to be respectable. But nobody wants to hire an unwed mother, nobody wants to rent to her, nobody wants to be seen with her, so I ran. I've run from 3 towns before this one, every time thinking maybe the next place would be different. Maybe the next place would show mercy." She looked directly at Margaret. "But there is no mercy, not for women like me. One mistake and we're marked forever. One piece of bad luck and we're worthless. It doesn't matter how hard we work, how much we suffer, how desperately we try to make things right. We're always going to be fallen women, always going to be the cautionary tale you tell your daughters." "Miss Hart," the mayor began, but Lena wasn't finished. "I know what you want me to do. You want me to leave quietly, take my shame somewhere else, disappear so you don't have to look at the reminder that bad things happen to good people. And maybe I should. Maybe Reed's right that you can't vote me out, but you can sure make my life unbearable until I leave on my own. I know how this works." She turned to Reed, her heart breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I let you fight for me. I should have run when I had the chance. Should have protected you from all this." Reed stood and took both her hands. "Don't apologize. Don't you dare apologize for existing, for having a child, for wanting a life. None of this is your fault. It doesn't matter whose fault it is what it is." Lena pulled her hands free gently. "These people are right about one thing. I don't belong here. I don't belong anywhere, and I won't let you destroy your life trying to prove otherwise." "Lena, no, listen to me." She looked up at him through her tears. "You asked me to marry you, and part of me wants to say yes more than anything, but I can't do that to you. I can't let you sacrifice everything, your business, your reputation, your place in this community, for me. You deserve better than that." "You are better than that." "I'm really not." Lena's voice broke completely. "I'm exactly what Margaret says I am. A woman who made a mistake and can't escape it. A burden. A problem. And I won't make you carry that." She turned to the room full of hostile and curious faces. "I'll leave. Tomorrow morning. You win, Mrs. Fairweather. You all win. I'll take my son and go somewhere else. And you can go back to being the respectable community you want to be. Just please, please leave Reed alone. He was only trying to do the right thing. Don't punish him for that." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Lena stood there, exposed and broken, waiting for someone to speak, waiting for permission to leave to end this nightmare. But it was Caleb who spoke first. "I don't want to leave." His small voice cut through the tension like a knife. Every eye in the room turned to the 4-year-old boy standing beside his mother, his face streaked with tears but his expression fierce. "I don't want to leave," he repeated, louder now. "I like it here. I like Mr. Reed and Mrs. Patterson and the horses and my room and everything. Why do we have to go?" Lena knelt beside him, her own tears falling freely. Baby, sometimes we have to leave even when we don't want to. But why? We didn't do anything bad. You said we didn't do anything bad. We didn't, but sometimes her voice failed. Reed knelt too, facing Caleb. Your mama's right. You didn't do anything bad. Neither did she. Some people just don't understand that yet. Then make them understand. Caleb's voice rose, desperate and young and heartbreakingly earnest. You're good at talking. You made them listen before. Make them listen now. Reed looked at Lena, something fierce and determined in his eyes. Then he stood and turned back to the room. You heard him, Reed said quietly. Make us understand. Help us understand how we're supposed to look this child in the eye and tell him his mother isn't good enough. Tell him what his mother's crime was. Tell him why he deserves to be driven from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to make friends or feel safe or believe that the world might be kind. He walked forward slowly, moving through the crowd until he stood directly in front of Margaret Fairweather. You want to protect the children of this community? Then protect him. He's a child. An innocent child who's already suffered because of circumstances beyond his control. Are you really going to make him suffer more? Are you really going to be the reason he learns that cruelty wins, that mercy is a myth, that good people will always abandon you when things get hard? Margaret's face was pale now, her composure finally cracking. This isn't about the child. It's absolutely about the child. Every choice we make is about the children, what we teach them, what world we build for them. Right now, we're teaching them that mistakes are unforgivable, that shame is permanent, that if you're unlucky enough to be born to the wrong woman, you'll pay for it your whole life. Reed's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried through the silent room. Is that really the lesson you want to teach? No one answered. The room was frozen, caught between conviction and conscience. Reed turned back to Lena and Caleb. He walked to them, knelt between them, and took both their hands. I love you, he said simply. Both of you. And I'm asking you, begging you, don't leave. Stay. Marry me. Let me be Caleb's father and your husband. Let me prove that not everyone abandons the people they love. Lena stared at him, unable to speak. This was insane, impossible. He was proposing to her in front of the entire hostile town, with her past laid bare and her shame on full display. No sane man would do this. But Reed had never pretended to be sane. He'd only ever claimed to be honest. I can't, she whispered. Yes, you can. They'll never forgive this. Then they won't forgive it. I can live with their anger. I can't live with letting you go. Caleb tugged on Reed's hand. If my mama marries you, can you be my papa? Reed's eyes filled with tears. If she'll have me, I'd be honored. Lena looked at her son's hopeful face, at Reed's determined one, at the room full of people who would judge her forever, no matter what choice she made. She thought about the 3 towns she'd fled, about the years of running, about teaching Caleb that love was something other people deserved, but never them. And she thought about Reed standing in front of the entire town, not once, but twice, declaring her worth when she'd stopped believing in it herself. She had spent 4 years trying to earn forgiveness, trying to prove she deserved mercy, trying to be small and quiet and acceptable enough that someone might finally let her stay. But maybe that wasn't how it worked. Maybe you didn't earn dignity. Maybe you just claimed it. Yes, she whispered. Reed's eyes widened. What? Yes. Louder now. I'll marry you. I'll stay. I'll claim my son and his father and dare anyone to say we don't deserve each other. Reed pulled her into his arms, and she let him, let the whole town see her being loved, being chosen, being held like she mattered. When he kissed her, she kissed him back, and didn't care who saw. The room erupted again, some in outrage, some in approval, everyone with an opinion. But Lena didn't hear any of it. For the first time in 4 years, she felt safe, and that was worth any price. The kiss ended, but Reed didn't let go. He held Lena close, his forehead pressed against hers, both of them breathing hard. Around them, the chaos of the town hall continued. Voices raised in anger and approval, chairs scraping, footsteps storming toward the exit. Margaret Fairweather's sharp commands cut through the noise, trying to restore order, but her authority was crumbling. The town had fractured, and there was no putting it back together the way it had been. Caleb tugged at Reed's sleeve. Does this mean you're my papa now? Reed pulled back from Lena just enough to look down at the boy. His eyes were wet, but he was smiling. If that's all right with you. It's all right with me. Caleb threw his arms around Reed's neck, and Reed lifted him up, holding him tight. Over the boy's shoulder, his eyes met Lena's, and the look that passed between them needed no words. They had crossed a line there was no going back from. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Thomas Garrett pushed through the crowd toward them, his weathered face creased with something that looked like pride. You've got courage, all three of you, more than most people ever find. He glanced back at the chaos. You know this isn't over, though. Margaret won't let this stand without a fight. Let her fight, Reed said quietly. We're not backing down. Sarah Mitchell appeared next, her hands twisting nervously in her apron. I meant what I said earlier about my sister, about not being silent this time. She looked at Lena directly. If you need anything at all, you come find me. You're not alone in this. More people approached, some offering congratulations, others just quiet support. Not everyone. Many were already leaving, faces tight with disapproval or disgust. But enough stayed that Lena felt something shift inside her chest. For years she'd believed she was completely alone, that no one would ever stand with her. But here, in this fractured town hall, she could see the evidence that she'd been wrong. Not everyone would abandon her. Not everyone believed shame was permanent. Margaret Fairweather stood near the front of the room, surrounded by her remaining supporters, her face pale with fury. She caught Lena's eye across the crowd, and the hatred there was pure and undiluted. This wasn't over. Margaret had lost control of the narrative, lost her absolute authority, and she would make them pay for it if she could. But for now, Lena couldn't bring herself to care. Reed's arm was solid around her waist. Caleb was chattering happily about living on the ranch with the horses, and the weight she'd carried for 4 years felt lighter than it had in memory. The mayor finally managed to restore enough order to officially adjourn the meeting. People filed out in clusters, already forming new alliances based on which side of the divide they'd chosen. Lena noticed that several of Margaret's usual supporters had drifted away, no longer willing to be associated with what had happened here today. Mrs. Patterson appeared at Lena's elbow. You'll be moving to the ranch, I expect. Lena blinked, realizing she hadn't thought that far ahead. I suppose so. If that's... She looked at Reed. Whenever you're ready, Reed said. No rush. We can take whatever time you need to feel comfortable. Nonsense, Mrs. Patterson said briskly. The girl just agreed to marry you in front of the whole town. Waiting serves no purpose except giving Margaret more time to scheme. You get married soon, move to the ranch, and show everyone this is real and permanent. Reed's eyebrows rose. I'm not going to rush Lena into anything she's not ready for. I'm ready. Lena's voice surprised even herself. But it was true. She'd spent 4 years hesitating, second-guessing, trying to make herself acceptable to people who would never accept her. She was done with that. Mrs. Patterson's right. The sooner we do this, the clearer it is that we're not ashamed, that we're not asking permission. Reed studied her face. You're sure? I'm sure. She squeezed his hand. I'm terrified, but I'm sure. A slow smile spread across Reed's face. Then let's get married. This week. If we can manage it. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. I'll help with the arrangements. Sarah Mitchell will too if I'm any judge of character. Between us, we'll make it happen. They walked back to the boarding house together, a small procession that turned heads on every street. Lena kept expecting someone to stop them, to tell them this was all a mistake, that the town wouldn't allow it. But no one did. People stared, whispered, pointed, but no one intervened. When they reached the boarding house, Reed crouched down to Caleb's level. I need to head back to the ranch, take care of the horses. But I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll start figuring out how to move you and your mama out there. That sound good? Caleb nodded eagerly. Can I have my own room? You can have your own room. We'll fix it up however you want. With shelves for all the animals you made me? With shelves for all the animals. Reed ruffled the boy's hair, then stood and turned to Lena. You all right? Really? Lena nodded, though her hands were shaking. I think so. It's a lot. An hour ago, I was preparing to leave town forever, and now you're getting married and moving to a ranch." Reed's smile was gentle. "I know it's fast. If you need more time—" "No, I meant what I said. I'm ready." She took a breath. "I'm scared of what's coming, of how Margaret will retaliate, of whether we can actually make this work. But I'm not scared of you. I'm not scared of us. That's new for me." Reed pulled her close one more time, and she let herself lean into his strength. "We'll figure it out, one day at a time." He left as the sun was setting, and Lana climbed the stairs to her little room with Caleb chattering about horses and his new papa and all the things he wanted to show Reed at the ranch. She let him talk while she pulled out their belongings, so few they still fit in a single bag, and started sorting through what needed to happen next. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway an hour later. "Sarah Mitchell just left. She's talking to Pastor Williams about performing the ceremony. He's a decent man. I think he'll agree. And if he won't, then we'll find someone who will. There are 3 preachers in this county. One of them will do right by you." Mrs. Patterson sat heavily on the room's single chair. "You know Margaret won't let this go quietly." "I know. She'll try to hurt Reed's business, spread rumors, make life difficult in every small way she can." The older woman's eyes were shrewd. "Can you live with that? Knowing you're the reason?" Lena was quiet for a moment, watching Caleb play with his wooden animals on the floor. "For 4 years, I've lived with being the reason my son has no home, no stability, no father. I've lived with being the reason we have to run, the reason people turn away, the reason everything good falls apart." She looked up at Mrs. Patterson. "If the price of stopping that is becoming the reason Reed faces some hardship, yes, I can live with that. Because he chose this. He knows what it costs, and he chose it anyway." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. "Good. Because he'll need you to be strong when the weight of it hits. Men like Reed, good men who do the right thing, they're not used to facing real consequence for their decency. It'll be hard on him. Then I'll help him carry it, the way he's helped me. That's all any marriage is in the end. 2 people choosing to carry the weight together instead of alone." Mrs. Patterson stood, smoothing her skirts. "Get some rest. Tomorrow starts a whole new chapter." But rest didn't come easily. Lena lay awake long after Caleb fell asleep, her mind spinning through everything that had to happen, everything that could go wrong. She thought about the look on Margaret's face, about the people who'd left the town hall in disgust, about the uncertain future stretching ahead. But she also thought about Reed's arms around her, about Caleb's joy at finally having a father, about the possibility, fragile but real, of building something that lasted. The next morning brought a knock at dawn. Lena opened the door to find Sarah Mitchell standing there with a basket of fresh baked goods and a nervous smile. "I spoke to Pastor Williams last night. He'll perform the ceremony this Saturday, if you're willing." Sarah's words came out in a rush. "He said he won't turn away 2 people who want to build a life together honestly, no matter what the circumstances. His own daughter, well, she had troubles too years ago. He understands." Lena's throat tightened. "Saturday. That's 4 days from now." "I know it's fast, but Mrs. Patterson thought, and I agree, that dragging this out only gives Margaret more time to interfere." Sarah set the basket down. "I've been sewing. I have a dress that might fit you with some alterations. It's not fancy, but it's white and clean and respectable. If you'd accept it." "You don't have to do this." "I know I don't. I want to." Sarah's eyes were fierce. "I told you about my sister. She died believing she was worthless, that her mistake had made her unworthy of love or kindness or even basic human decency. I can't bring her back, but I can stand with you. I can help you prove that the story doesn't have to end in tragedy." Lena found herself crying again, overwhelmed by kindness she still wasn't sure she deserved. Sarah pulled her into a quick, fierce hug. "You're going to be fine. Better than fine. Reed Lawson's a good man, and you're stronger than you know. Together, you'll weather whatever comes." The next 4 days passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah and Mrs. Patterson took over most of the planning, organizing everything with the efficient ruthlessness of women who'd been running households for decades. Reed came by every day, bringing supplies, answering Caleb's endless questions, stealing quiet moments with Lena when they could find them. "You sure about this?" he asked her on Thursday evening, sitting on the boarding house steps while Caleb played in the yard. "It's not too late to slow down if you're having second thoughts." "I'm not having second thoughts. I'm having about 1,000 thoughts, but none of them are about whether I want to marry you." Lena leaned against his shoulder. "Are you? Having second thoughts?" "Not even one." Reed's arm came around her. "I've been alone for a long time, Lena. Longer than you know. I'd convinced myself I was fine with it, that I didn't need anyone. Then I saw you at that festival, trying so hard to be invisible, and something just broke open inside me. I knew I had to know you, had to understand what put that look in your eyes." "What look?" "Like you were carrying the whole world on your shoulders and nobody could see the weight." He turned to face her. "I want to help you put it down. I want you to know what it feels like to be light." Lena kissed him then, soft and slow, tasting hope and fear and the future all mixed together. When they pulled apart, Caleb was watching them with a satisfied expression. "You're supposed to kiss at the wedding," the boy informed them seriously. "Mrs. Sarah told me." "We're practicing," Reed said solemnly. "You're pretty good at it." They both laughed, and for a moment everything felt impossibly simple and right. Saturday dawned clear and cool, the kind of Wyoming morning that promised heat later but started gentle. Lena woke early, her stomach a knot of nerves. Mrs. Patterson brought her breakfast, but she could barely eat. Sarah arrived at mid-morning with the promised dress. It was simple but beautiful, white cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs, fitted at the waist and falling in soft folds to the floor. With some quick alterations, it fit Lena perfectly. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, her eyes wet. "Truly beautiful." Lena stared at herself in the small mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back. For 4 years, she'd seen only shame when she looked at her reflection, the visible mark of her failure, her unworthiness. But today, in this white dress with her hair braided and woven with wildflowers Sarah had gathered, she looked like a bride, like a woman who deserved to be loved. The ceremony was set for 2 in the afternoon at the small church on the edge of town. Lena had worried that it would be empty, that no one would come to witness a fallen woman's wedding. But when Mrs. Patterson's wagon pulled up to the church, there were people waiting. Not many, perhaps 20 in total. But they were there. Thomas Garrett and his wife, Sarah Mitchell, and her husband, the young couple who'd spoken up at the town meeting, a handful of others. Mrs. Patterson had invited them personally, had made it clear that showing up was a statement of support. These were the people who'd chosen mercy over judgment, who decided that Lena Hart deserved a second chance. Reed was waiting at the altar in a clean suit, his hair combed back, his face nervous and eager. When he saw Lena in the doorway, his expression transformed into something that made her breath catch. He looked at her like she was everything he'd ever wanted. Caleb walked beside her, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers, and taking his role as escort very seriously. When they reached the front of the church, the boy handed the flowers to his mother, then went to stand beside Reed. "We're a family now, right?" Caleb whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "We're a family now," Reed confirmed. Pastor Williams was a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and gentle hands. He spoke briefly about marriage being a covenant of commitment and grace, about 2 people choosing to walk through life together regardless of what the world threw at them. He didn't mention Lena's past, didn't offer caveats or conditions. He simply treated this as what it was, 2 people in love, making a promise. When it came time for vows, Reed took Lena's hands and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "I promise to stand with you in good times and bad, to love you when it's easy and when it's hard, to be a father to Caleb and a partner to you, to never ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. I see you, Lena, all of you, and I choose you, today and every day after." Lena's voice shook when she responded. "I promise to trust you when fear tells me to run, to build a life with you instead of just surviving, to let you love me even when I don't think I deserve it, to be honest with you, to stand with you, to choose you the way you've chosen me. I see you too, Reed, and I promise not to look away." Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, and when Reed kissed her, the small gathering broke into applause. Caleb cheered loudest of all, jumping up and down with pure joy. They walked out of the church together, husband and wife and son, into the bright afternoon sun. Lena expected to see protesters, angry faces, Margaret Fairweather with more condemnation. But the street was empty except for their small group of supporters. "Margaret's not stupid," Thomas Garrett said quietly. "She knows making a scene at a wedding would turn even her allies against her. She'll wait, strike when it's less visible." "Let her wait," Reed said. He lifted Caleb onto his shoulders and took Lena's hand. "We're ready." Sarah and Mrs. Patterson had arranged a small gathering at the boarding house. Simple food, punch, a cake that Sarah had baked and decorated with careful love. It wasn't a grand affair, but it was joyful. These people who'd chosen to stand with them celebrated with genuine warmth, toasting their future and welcoming Lena into the community of people willing to believe in second chances. As the sun set and the gathering wound down, Reed loaded their few belongings into his wagon. Everything Lena and Caleb owned fit easily, with room to spare. 4 years of running had taught her not to accumulate things she couldn't carry. Mrs. Patterson hugged her at the boarding house door. "You come back and visit, you hear me? You're always welcome here." "Thank you for everything, for giving me a chance when no one else would." "You gave yourself a chance, girl. I just provided a roof." The older woman's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Now go, build your life, be happy. That's the best revenge against people like Margaret, living well." The ride to Reed's ranch was quiet, Caleb already asleep between them on the wagon seat. Lena watched the landscape roll past, the scrub brush and rocky outcroppings, the creek running low, the wide open sky turning purple and gold with sunset. This was home now. This wild, beautiful, unforgiving territory that had broken her and was now offering her a chance to heal. The ranch appeared around the familiar bend, and Lena felt something settle in her chest. Reed had been working on the house, she could see. Fresh paint on the shutters, new steps leading to the porch, flowers planted in boxes beneath the windows. He'd made it ready for a family. Reed carried Caleb inside and laid him gently in the small bedroom he'd prepared. Shelves already built for the collection of wooden animals, a quilt on the bed that Reed had found somewhere, a window looking out on the corrals. The boy stirred but didn't wake, exhausted by excitement and emotion. Lena stood in the doorway watching Reed tuck her son in, and felt tears slip down her cheeks. This gentle man who'd taken on not just her but her child, who'd built shelves and planted flowers, and prepared a home for people he barely knew because he believed they deserved one. How had she gotten this lucky? Reed turned and saw her crying. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." She wiped at her face. "I keep waiting for this to fall apart. For you to realize what you've done, what you've taken on. For this to be revealed as some kind of dream I'm going to wake up from." Reed crossed to her and took her face in his hands. "This is real. I'm real. We're married, you're home, and nothing is going to change that." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I know you're scared. I know trust is hard for you, but I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me now. Promise?" "I promise." They stood there in the hallway of their home while the last light faded outside, holding each other, learning the shape of forever. The first week of marriage was an adjustment, learning to share space, to coordinate schedules, to build routines. Reed taught Caleb how to feed the horses and check the fences. Lena learned to cook on Reed's old stove, to manage the household, to feel at home in rooms that belonged to her. They worked side by side, establishing rhythms, finding their way. And Margaret Fairweather struck exactly when Thomas Garrett had predicted she would, quietly, invisibly, where it hurt most. Reed came home from town one afternoon with a tight expression. Morrison canceled his horse order, said he'd found another supplier. Lena's stomach dropped. "Because of me. Because of Margaret, more likely. She's been making the rounds, I'd bet. Suggesting that doing business with me is the same as endorsing immoral behavior." Reed's jaw was tight. "It's fine. I've got other buyers." But over the next 2 weeks, 3 more orders were canceled. People who'd done business with Reed for years suddenly found other suppliers, other trainers, other solutions. It wasn't universal. Thomas Garrett made a point of buying 2 horses he didn't really need, and a few others stayed loyal. But it was enough to hurt. Lena watched Reed's shoulders grow tighter, watched him spend longer hours working, trying to make up the lost income. She felt the weight of guilt pressing down on her again, the familiar voice saying this was her fault, that she was destroying him. One night, after Caleb was asleep, she found Reed in the barn brushing down Sable with methodical, almost angry strokes. "I'm sorry," she said from the doorway. Reed looked up, surprised. For what? For this. For the lost business, for Margaret's campaign, for... Stop. Reed set down the brush and crossed to her. "This isn't your fault. You didn't ask for any of this. But it's happening because of me. It's happening because some people are cruel and small-minded, because Margaret Fairweather can't stand losing control, because our town values judgment over mercy." Reed took her hands. "But you know what? I don't regret it. Not for 1 second. I'd lose every customer I have if it meant keeping you and Caleb. You shouldn't have to lose anything. You were doing fine before I came along. I was lonely. I was going through the motions. I had a business, but not a life." Reed's voice was fierce now. "You gave me a life, Lena. You and Caleb, you're the reason I wake up happy. The reason I have something to build for. Losing a few horse sales is nothing compared to that. But what if it gets worse? What if you can't sustain the ranch? Then we'll figure it out. Together, we'll find other buyers, other work, other solutions. But we do it together." He cupped her face. "You need to stop waiting for me to regret this. I won't. I can't. You're not a burden I'm carrying. You're my wife, my partner, my family. The sooner you accept that, the happier we'll both be." Lena wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love could be this simple, this unconditional, but years of rejection had taught her to doubt. As if sensing her thoughts, Reed said quietly, "I know you don't believe me yet. That's all right. I'll keep proving it until you do. That's what marriage is, showing up every day until trust becomes natural instead of terrifying." Over the following weeks, he did exactly that. When money got tight, Reed took on extra work breaking horses for a rancher 2 counties over. When Lena suggested she find work in town to help, Reed gently refused, not because he thought she couldn't, but because he knew the judgment she'd face would be harder than the financial strain. "We'll manage," he said firmly. "I'm not sending you back into that gauntlet every day just to prove we can survive. We'll find another way." And they did. Reed proved to be a better horse trainer than even he'd realized. His patience and skill drew buyers from farther afield, people who didn't know or care about Miller's Crossing politics. Slowly, the ranch stabilized. It wasn't prosperous, but it was sustainable. Caleb thrived in ways that broke Lena's heart with joy. He followed Reed everywhere, learning to care for animals, to mend fences, to take pride in work well done. The haunted wariness that had shadowed him since birth gradually faded, replaced by the bright confidence of a child who knew he was loved and wanted. One evening, 6 months after the wedding, Lena was making supper when she heard Caleb's voice from outside. "Papa, Papa, come quick. One of the mares is having her baby." "Papa." Not Mr. Reed anymore. "Papa." Lena stepped to the window and watched Reed scoop Caleb up and run toward the barn, the boy chattering excitedly. Her throat tightened with emotion so fierce it was almost painful. This was what she'd wanted for her son, a father who showed up, who stayed, who made him feel worthy of love. And against all odds, she'd found it. That night, after they'd helped the mare deliver a healthy foal and Caleb had finally been coaxed to bed despite his protest that he needed to watch the baby horse, Reed found Lena on the porch, watching the stars. "He called you Papa today," she said softly. Reed settled beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders. "I know, I heard. Does that feel strange, taking on someone else's child?" "He's not someone else's child. He's ours." Reed's voice was quiet, but certain. "The man who left you, he was Caleb's father by biology, but I'm his papa by choice. And choice matters more." Lena leaned into him, feeling safe in a way she'd never quite believed possible. "I love you. I don't think I've said that enough." "You've said it. You show it every day. In the way you trust me with Caleb, the way you've built a home here, the way you've stopped flinching every time someone says something kind." Reed kissed her temple. "But I'll never get tired of hearing it." "I love you," she repeated. And I'm starting to believe this is real, that it's not going to disappear. Good, because it's not. You're stuck with me, remember? They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Inside, their son slept safely. Around them, a life they'd built together continued its steady rhythm. It wasn't perfect. Margaret Fairweather still made trouble when she could, though her power had diminished considerably when several prominent families quietly sided against her after the wedding. The town remained divided, some people welcoming Lena with genuine warmth, others maintaining icy distance. But slowly, over months and then years, simple persistence wore down opposition. It was hard to maintain outrage against a woman who kept to herself, raised her son well, and caused no trouble. 2 years after their wedding, Lena gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. Sarah Mitchell attended the birth, and afterward she held the baby with tears streaming down her face. "My sister never got this," she whispered. "Never got to see her daughter grow up in a loving home with a father who claimed her. Thank you for letting me be part of this, for letting me see that the story can end differently." When Caleb met his baby sister, he was 6 years old and utterly besotted. He sat beside Lena's bed holding Grace's tiny hand and announced solemnly that he would protect her forever, that no one would ever be mean to her or make her feel bad. Reed, watching from the doorway, caught Lena's eye and smiled. They'd built this, a family forged not from perfection, but from the decision to choose each other despite the cost. 5 years after their wedding, Lena stood in the yard of their ranch watching Caleb teach Grace how to braid rope while Reed worked with a young horse in the corral. The ranch had grown. They'd bought more land, built a larger barn, established a reputation that drew buyers from across the territory. They were comfortable now, not wealthy, but secure. More importantly, they were happy. Margaret Fairweather had moved away 2 years earlier when her husband died and her sons convinced her to live with them in Denver. Her departure had eased the last lingering tension in Miller's Crossing. Without her constant pressure to maintain rigid social hierarchies, the town had relaxed into something more tolerant, more willing to judge people by their actions rather than their pasts. Lena had even made friends, real friends, not just people who tolerated her. Sarah Mitchell remained close, and several other women had gradually warmed to her. They came by for coffee, shared recipes, helped with the children. Lena was no longer the woman with a past. She was Reed Lawson's wife, Caleb and Grace's mother, a respected member of the community. Sometimes she still woke in the night terrified that it would all vanish, that she'd open her eyes and find herself back in that boarding house room, packing to flee another town. But then Reed would pull her close, and she'd hear Caleb's soft breathing from his room and smell the familiar scent of sage and leather and home, and the fear would fade. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, Reed said quietly, "Do you ever think about him? Caleb's biological father?" Lena was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes. I used to think about him all the time, what I'd say if I saw him, whether he ever thought about the child he'd abandoned, if he regretted it." She leaned against Reed's shoulder. "But honestly, he's not worth the energy. He made his choice. You made yours. And your choice is the one that mattered. He doesn't know what he missed. No, he doesn't." Lena looked out at their land, their children, their life. "But we do. We know what it looks like when someone stays, when someone fights, when someone chooses love over convenience." Reed kissed her hair. "Best choice I ever made. Best choice we both made." Inside the house, Grace shrieked with laughter at something Caleb said, and they both smiled at the sound. This was what Lena had dreamed of in those dark years of running. Not just survival, but joy. Not just tolerance, but belonging. Not just existence, but a life worth living. 10 years after that first town meeting where Reed had stood up and said she deserved dignity, Lena Hart Lawson stood in the same town hall for a very different reason. The schoolhouse needed a new teacher, and after years of quietly helping Caleb and other children with their lessons, several parents had suggested she apply. "You've got the education for it," Sarah Mitchell had urged, "and you're patient with children. The town needs you. The town needs you, not the town will tolerate you, not the town might allow you. The town needs you." Lena had applied, and the school board had voted unanimously to hire her. Now she stood in front of the town council making her acceptance speech, looking out at faces that were mostly friendly, mostly welcoming. Reed sat in the front row with Caleb beside him, 12 years old now and growing like a weed, already showing signs of his father's quiet strength. Grace was at home with Sarah, but Lena could feel her presence too, the weight of family and home and belonging. "Thank you for this opportunity," Lena said, her voice steady. "I know my path to this moment wasn't conventional. I know some of you remember a time when my presence in this town was controversial." She saw a few people shift uncomfortably, but she pressed on. "But I hope I've proven over the years that a person's past doesn't have to define their future. That second chances aren't just possible, they're worth fighting for. I promise to bring that same belief to teaching your children, to show them that mistakes aren't the end of the story, just part of it. That dignity and worth aren't earned through perfection, but claimed through courage." The room was silent for a moment after she finished. Then Thomas Garrett started clapping, and others joined in, and suddenly the whole room was applauding. Lena's eyes found Reed's, and the pride in his face made her heart swell. This was victory. Not the absence of struggle, but the decision to keep going despite it. Not erasing the past, but building a future that mattered more. After the meeting, as they walked home through the quiet streets, Caleb said, "Mama, are you happy now?" Lena stopped walking and looked at her son. This beautiful boy who'd endured so much upheaval in his early years but had grown into someone kind and strong. "Yes, sweet boy, I'm happy now." "Good," Caleb grinned, "because Papa said you used to be sad all the time before we met him. I'm glad you're not sad anymore." Reed ruffled Caleb's hair. "We're all glad about that." They walked on, the three of them, through the town that had once tried to drive them out, but had eventually learned to make room for love that didn't fit neat categories. The night was cool and clear, stars beginning to emerge overhead, and Lena felt the kind of peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. She thought about the woman she'd been 10 years ago, broken, ashamed, convinced she deserved nothing good. She thought about the towns she'd fled, the years spent running, the belief that she would never be anything more than her worst moment. And she thought about Reed Lawson stepping forward in a dusty square and saying her name with respect, about him choosing her when the whole world said she wasn't worth choosing, about him proving day after day, year after year, that love was a decision you kept making even when it cost you something. She'd been wrong about so many things. Wrong that she didn't deserve happiness. Wrong that shame was permanent. Wrong that her son would never have a real family. Wrong that courage meant facing the world alone. Real courage, she'd learned, was letting someone stand beside you, was accepting help when you'd been taught to expect judgment, was building a life on the foundation of grace instead of perfection. Years later, when Caleb was grown and had children of his own, he would tell them about his mother, about her strength, her resilience, her refusal to let the world tell her she was worthless. He would tell them about Reed Lawson, the man who'd chosen to be his father and had never once made him feel like second choice. He would tell them that family wasn't just about blood, but about showing up, about staying, about love that proved itself through action, not just words. And he would tell them that everyone deserves a second chance, that past mistakes don't define future worth, that the story doesn't end when you fall, it ends when you decide to stop getting back up. But Lena wouldn't be there to hear those stories. She would be gone by then, having lived a long, full life as a wife, mother, grandmother, and teacher who touched hundreds of young lives with her quiet belief that every person had value, every story had possibility. But on this night, walking through Miller's Crossing with her husband's hand in hers and her son chattering happily beside them, Lena Hart Lawson was simply present, simply grateful, simply home. The woman who no one had wanted had become the woman who mattered most, not because she'd changed who she was, but because she'd finally found people who saw her worth. And in the end, that made all the difference.